Okay, so I've got some questions. We are going to aim to wrap up at 7:30 as planned, so that everyone can have their dinner, or lunch, or whatever time zone is appropriate to you. I've slightly lost track, I'll be honest. The other thing that I was going to suggest to our lovely panelists is that if you have any questions that you would like to ask each other, because I thought that could be very interesting, please do. I'm just going to let that sit with you for a moment, and I will ask some of the questions that we've been asked. So David, there was a great question, and actually, to be honest, Eddie and Peter, you might have some views on this as well, but there was a question about whether you think that psychedelics in treating people with depression, whether it's curing their symptoms, or whether actually it's just shifting their mindset. Or well, I don't know whether that's maybe one and the same thing, but I think I see what they mean.
I can see, yeah. So thinking about it at a sort of biological level, we developed a theory, Robin Conrad Harris and I, a few years ago, called a tale of two receptors. And I think we pretty convincingly argued that SSRIs work in a different part of the brain and through a different receptor mechanism to psychedelics. So they essentially, what SSRIs do is basically blunt the effect of psychosocial stress or physical stress on brain function and allow the brain to kind of heal passively over a period of weeks or months. Whereas psychedelics can disrupt the thinking processes and allow people to recover very quickly. So these are fundamentally different mechanisms. And actually our latest work, which is not yet published, we're still analyzing it, where we've compared the SSRI escitalopram with psilocybin in depression, actually show that. They show that brain imaging studies show very clear differences in the circuits which underpin the recovery from both those. So I think they do work very differently. I think they both, the mechanisms are kind of in some ways complementary, but and maybe individuals will benefit from both in the course of a lifetime, but the immediate restorative effects are fundamentally different.
Perfect. I think that's probably what they were getting to. And then Peter, I have a question here for you that, in full honesty, I think is from a philosopher, because I don't understand one of the words in it. So you might need to just, I'm not going to lie about it. So you might need to unpack that a little bit, and I'm not going to be the only one. So yeah, here we go. Do you think that the psychedelic dissolution of ego, I'm sort of with us here, is a reflection of the nature of mereological nihilism?
What did you say? Mereological nihilism?
It was spelled MERELOGICAL. Mereological. I don't know what that word is.
Mereological means of parts, but I've never heard it as a prefix to nihilism, so I can't answer that question fully. But I'll say this, that the general question about ego dissolution, as it's called, and nihilism, I can answer a more broader question, I guess. It's very interesting, because today a lot of the discourse today is about how psychedelics foster, like I said, nature connectedness, a greater form of compassion, and so foster kind of, maybe Eddie can speak about this better than I can, but I'll start. And they foster all these kind of what we consider to be moral virtues, but more than last century and before that, a big element of mysticism, if you now identify psychedelic experience with mysticism, I think there's an overlap. It's not exactly the same thing, but there's an overlap because there's different kinds of psychedelic experiences, different kinds of mysticism. But if in that overlap, you define psychedelic experience as mystical, then it's interesting because like Bertrand Russell wrote this great book in 1910, I think, called Mysticism and Logic. And he says, one of the 4 criteria of the mystical state, as I mentioned, is nihilism, right? Is the view that there's no such thing as good and evil. That these are cultural principles that, like we see in the past, the good and evil changes, fluctuates. And some people say, yeah, but there are solid things. No, there's not. I mean, you look at ancient Sparta, there are very, very different kind of virtues. So interesting question for me then. Okay, so if you lose your ego, in other words, if you transcend your culture and you see moral principles like sort of outside of you and not absolute, what ramifications would that have on you as a person? Nobel laureate Octavio Paz wrote about this in a book called Alternating Current, for example. Very interesting. I think it gets you away from, it can get you away from dogmas, but maybe it's dogmas that inculcate you in the first place. And this is a big debate, like I said, about perennialism and contextualism. I don't know, but I personally don't believe in absolute good and evil. I got that though from Nietzsche rather than from substances, but they are pretty much in accord. At the same time, I'd say this, that I think psychedelics are of extreme value to one of the penetrating moral questions of today, which is the ecological crisis. I think they offer so much with regard to that nature connectedness, changing one's worldview, and thus caring more about just resetting one's consciousness on nature itself. I think so. So in that sense, it's very moral. In another sense, it's amoral, not immoral, but amoral as well. But that probably doesn't answer the question at all. But you know, interesting things to think about. You know.
It did for me. So that was great.
I'd like to jump in there just because I've got an axe to grind about something that Peter said, and so it might be fun to have a back and forth on that. So this stuff about the nature connectedness, Peter, I just don't buy it in terms of, well, I mean, I think it's an empirical question, the extent to which there's a causal effect here. You know what? I think probably there is a causal effect here, and it might be as powerful as anything else that's going on. But there's like, this is a very popular position in these circles, right? That it's said to a greater or lesser extent, these are going to be the key to fix the ecological crisis, or like an important tool here. But for me, this just seems to be like butting up against a real implementation problem, right? And so how I think things are going, what's happening here is that with all the success in psychiatry, say psilocybin for depression works really well, psilocybin for tobacco addiction works really well. And so people then think psilocybin for not caring about the earth works really well. But these are very different questions, right? So psilocybin works for depression in the people that want to cure their depression, which is a good deal of them. Psilocybin works for tobacco addiction in the people that want to be cured of their tobacco addiction, and a lot of them don't. But what are we going to say? Like, psilocybin works for not caring about the earth sufficiently, right? So what we want to give it to the people who don't care about the earth sufficiently. But so what that's saying is that we've got to go to people saying, hey, you don't care about the right things. You don't value the right things, which happen to be the things we value. But if you take this pill, you'll start caring about the right things. So there is no significant subset of the population that don't care about the earth but wish they did. Like, and we can't force people to have it. It might be like a nice small consequence of liberalization in general, is that, oh, there's a small bump in the people that care about the world. But this is not the main part of our armament for fixing the ecological crisis.
Okay, well, yeah, no, interesting point. I think you're straw manning me. I never said that, you know, I'm going to force psilocybin upon people.
I'm sorry, Peter, that wasn't my intention.
I know. I'll say this. The founder of deep ecology, a Norwegian philosopher called Arne Næss, he said, deep ecology is this form of environmentalism which gets at the deeper problem. So there's like superficial environmentalism, which is, you know, don't drive as much, don't eat as much meat, use less plastic, and so on and so forth, right? That's all well and good. But to fundamentally change our approach to the world, we need to go deeper than that and change our general worldview. Now, Arne Næss argues that one way of doing this is through like understanding Spinoza's philosophy. Now, Spinoza's philosophy was sort of an argument against Descartes' philosophy. So Spinoza was a panpsychist, a pantheist. He thought that everything, all of nature was alive, essentially. And I agree with that. I think that is the fundamental essence. It's not about forcing people to believe things differently. It's about offering them different worldviews that might change their point. Now, it's another case, but I believe that certain psychedelics give you this kind of like these empirical studies on nature connectedness. How do you understand that? Why would it be the case that it fosters this nature connectedness? Is it just some kind of strange delusional thing, or is it veridical again? Does it actually amplify some real connection that we do have? And I think it does. This would be a paper in itself. And I think that psychedelics then, yeah, they foster that nature connectedness. This can be understood then. This gives substantiation to this greater metaphysical view, which the deep ecologists say is vital for the environmental alleviation. So it's not I'm not suggesting in any way, yes, take a pill and we'll heal the world. Of course not. But on a far more complex etiology, causal chain, they are a contributing factor, I think, in our approach to the world, and I think that's their use.
That was great.
Vibe with that.
We've agreed. Good. Okay, I've got a great question, which I think potentially you might each all have your own spin on from the different perspectives of this panel, which is, what do we think the significance of the kind of different archetypes that are seen and that people experience during a trip? So, people commonly see fairies or angels or demons, because I think we could look at that from a brain perspective, certainly a philosophical aspect as well. And Eddie, I think as well, you've got something to say.
Well, yes. I mean, so it is interesting, isn't it? So, we've done, I don't know, 5 psilocybin imaging studies. We've done 1 LSD imaging study. We've done 1 DMT imaging study. The only one in which people actually came back and reported entities was the DMT study, which in itself is intriguing because superficially, and we haven't got the brain imaging data and analyzed yet because it's very difficult, but the EEG data of DMT looks exactly the same as the MEG data from a psilocybin LSD. So at a superficial level, at a cortical level, all 3 drugs desynchronize in the same way. So why should you see something interesting like an entity only under one? I'm hoping that the imaging data, where we can look deeper into the brain, may throw some light on that. But at present, it's a phenomenon that I can't explain. But Peter might be able to.
No, I can't at all. In fact, David and I remember we had this discussion. I mean, it's just a big mystery, like elves. Why elves? Why this archetype? At first, I thought this is probably
Peter. I know why elves. I've worked out why elves.
Oh, tell me.
Because that's an Amanita experience, and Amanita changes the gain in the retina. So the reason you get micropsia, macropsia, mostly with Amanita, is because it's basically disrupting that initial processing of size in the retina. I think that's why you see elves anyway.
So we see elves on Amanitas as well, then, right? But I don't know about that, because I mean, I've one hears about elves with salvia and all kinds, and also, so I thought, first of all, it's like maybe Terence McKenna put it out there, and then people are expecting that, and then they see it. But then you look at the history, and you see this is with mescaline reported from the early 1900s. So, no clue. Eddie, is
there anything?
Well, I feel so much more reassured that the other 2 don't have a good answer to this either. No, this is just one of many aspects of the psychedelic experience where, for now, I'm just quite okay basking in the mystery of it. No.
I mean, I actually would quite like to ask a question on this, which is whether the entities and archetypes that people see, are they culturally specific? Is that something we know about? Because someone's posted in the chat, well, surely it's because you grow up with Greek mythology or whatever specific kind of cultural stories. So is that, have you noticed whether there's a kind of cultural phenomena within it, or is that just a big unknown?
I mean, I'd say this is it's important to differentiate the experience you have and then the interpretation of it afterwards. So like maybe in one culture you see something strange and you say, oh, that was the god X, whatever it may be. But then again, I don't know, some of these entities on DMT, for example, are so strange that they don't fit into any culture.
No.
Right? Which makes me, suggests that no, it's not cultural. But then what the hell is it? And why would that be part of the human nature to let that emerge?
Well, I mean, I'd say I'm not saying this is true, but a very prosaic explanation, which most people won't like, is that it's just a very low level percept, in the same way as light, as the why do you have the tunneling of the light? Well, the reason you have I don't know why you have the tunneling light, but I suspect it's because, one possibility is that's what you get near-death experiences, when basically your visual cortex cannot do anything other than assume there's light there. So this could actually be a very low-grade experience. And the fact that end-of-life, near-death experiences are low-grade doesn't stop them having enormous, profound psychological consequences when you come out of them, because we know they're more likely to produce religious conversions than psychedelics. So it might be that would be the most prosaic explanation. I'm kind of hoping it's not the right one, but it could be.
I mean, another explanation, one could go into Jung's theory of archetypes, of course. I mean, I'm not that sympathetic to that, but I mean, maybe there might be some truth in it. I think
that's very interesting. I think one of the things that maybe we could throw out here now is that I've never had a Jungian. I've had Freudians talk to me, and I've had obviously loads of other psychotherapists talk. But I haven't had any Jungians getting interested, and it seems to me that this has got to be, Jungian philosophy and psychology should be the most interested in this.
Well, let me just add to that as a footnote then. In the volume Psychedelics and Philosophy, what we're publishing with Bloomsbury, we've got one chapter on a Jungian interpretation of psychedelics. So there you go.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm happy to edit that.
Oh yes, and yeah. So they are looking at it, but
good. I didn't
early
know.
days.
Well, maybe they don't care about me because I'm a psychiatrist.
Well, no, I think another issue with that, Jung himself was very dismissive of psychedelics, you see. So that's kind of stopped that obvious connection.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one last question. So it's a question specifically for David, asking how we can explore consciousness using an fMRI and other imaging techniques. But I thought it would also be interesting to expand that slightly and ask Eddie and Peter on their opinions about how we try and measure and sort of explain consciousness, which is, I think, both a scientific and a philosophical conundrum and a very big question, but do what you will with 5 or so minutes.
Well, I mean, I've given you a simplistic view of 2 levels of consciousness, 2 dimensions. I mean, most people that talk about consciousness, most of the research using imaging has been done around anesthesia, which is the GABA glutamate axis. And clearly, you can show that as people go out of consciousness into, the GABA-driven aesthetic sort of brain dead state, you can show where that happens, and that happens both at the cortical and at the thalamic level. So that dimension of consciousness is relatively understood. The serotonergic one we're beginning to get handles on, but beyond that, I mean, I suppose the other thing we have imaging in transcendental meditation, which shows prefrontal alterations very similar in size and location to what we saw with the psilocybin. So that's some examples of how you can do it. I mean, one of the interesting things we tried many years ago to see whether the bliss state of a very well-trained monk who we got to meditate in the scanner was related to dopamine release, but we couldn't really prove that. So it may, but I'm not sure I believe that dopamine is bliss anymore anyway. So, but I'll hand over to the others. They've probably got other insights.
Eddie?
No, I was just as David was talking there, I was just like sadly reflecting on, now I remember writing essays on this and having an opinion and a defensible position that I could stake out on this, but I think I just have to let that go. I no longer have an opinion on consciousness.
I mean, I'll just add this, that like I started my talk with, this is still really the great mystery. And of course, we are gaining insights into correlations of consciousness. But the great question is, why are they correlated? Why is there not just the brain activity that fosters behavior? Why do we even need consciousness? Yeah. Obviously, a lot of people think it's just an epiphenomena. It's completely unnecessary, but then that makes a mockery of evolution. Why would it have evolved, not only in us, but in multiple species and maintained itself, right? So there's this big conflict at issue here. I think consciousness is not only related to the brain. I don't think it can exist without a physical component, but I think that the components are far wider than we assume, you know. I think it's quite plausible that plants have a very basic feeling of sentience, like the ancient Greeks always believed, you know. How can we prove or disprove that, you know? These questions become quite metaphysical because they, you know, the problem with other minds is you can't actually directly see, it seems, another mind. You can see the correlates only. So how could we know whether even a dog had consciousness? Descartes didn't even believe that. He thought only humans did. So, so we have to use kind of like arguments from inference and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's a great mystery. And that's why psychedelics are so interesting, because they give you a greater insight about the possibilities of the mind and what it could be. You know, this is William James's, you know, cliched thing. You know, there exist all these different kinds of consciousness around us, separated by the filmiest of screens, you know, and we cannot understand the whole of reality unless we've understood that.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great point to end, Peter, that statement. He said, no account of the universe in its totality can be complete without understanding those. And that's my last great challenge. Not that I'll ever achieve it.
Good luck.
You guys might live long enough though, so I'm really impressed actually. You know, the younger generation taking this on. It's you'll do better than the 60s generation, I can guarantee that.
I don't know. I mean, it might be an inherent limitation of the human mind not to know this.
That's the spirit.
End with a high point.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think that is where we'll end.
Sorry.
That was absolutely fantastic. What a great set of talks. What a great Q&A. I wish we could do it forever and ever, but we can't. This is going to happen again and again throughout the conference, but we are where we are. So thank you all so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. That's been one of the best sessions I've ever engaged in. Thank you. You have the Eddie and Peter. For the first time, I understood what Peter was talking about. That was, and that was probably because Eddie sort of was the intro to Peter. It worked out brilliantly.
Perfect. Good. I'm glad it's all.
I'll see you later, Peter. We'll write again.
Yeah, see you soon. Cheers, Eddie. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Anna.
See you guys. Great.
Bye, guys.